So a couple months ago when Thor Love and Thunder came out, I saw it in theaters and I really hated it. It kind of sucks. And it's weird because I was a really big fan of Thor Ragnarok, same director, same actors, so I was like, why wouldn't I like this? But it was kind of hard to put my finger on it when I was sitting there and watching it. It isn't the same. And recently I rewatched it, and that kind of got me thinking, what happened to Thor? What happened to his story? Why did they make Thor Love and Thunder? So there's two things that I want to cover in this video. First, I want to talk specifically about Love and Thunder. I want to look at a couple of key scenes from Love and Thunder, and I want to compare them to very similar scenes from Thor Ragnarok, so we can kind of see why the same ideas work in one movie and fail in the other. Second, I want to talk about how the storytelling they did in Endgame and in Love and Thunder really derailed the direction the character arc had been heading in for the entire MCU up to that point, and how that damages the quality of the character arc as a result. So in order to make this video, I watched all the MCU movies with Thor in them, and watching them back to back kind of gave me a better idea of what the earlier movies and up through Infinity War, what those movies were trying to say about Thor's character, and how that sort of became derailed in Endgame and Love and Thunder. Okay, so in order for us to talk about Love and Thunder, you're gonna have to know what it's about. So quick plot summary for Love and Thunder. So this guy Gore is traveling through the desert with his daughter, and his daughter dies of starvation or dehydration despite the fact that Gore prayed to his god to save her. So Gore confronts his god, and his god is an asshole, so Gore kills him with this thing called the Necrosword, which corrupts him and makes him want to kill all the gods. So then, after the events of Endgame, Thor is traveling with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and he gets a bunch of distress signals about Gore killing all the gods. So Thor learns that Gore is going to attack Asgard next. Meanwhile, Jane Foster has been diagnosed with cancer, and she reads about Mjolnir's ability to heal people, so she travels to Asgard to see if fragments of Mjolnir can heal her cancer. And in doing so, she becomes Thor also. So the two of them meet up again, they fight off Gore, but Gore takes the Asgardian children to this place called the Shadow Realm, and then they go to this city of the gods to try to raise an army to fight Gore with, but that doesn't work, so they go to the Shadow Realm to confront Gore personally. We also learn that Gore's overarching plan is to use the Bifrost to open this place at the center of the universe called Eternity, where there's a wishing well, and you can make one wish and it'll be granted. So he's gonna wish to destroy all the gods, apparently. So that's his main plan. Anyways, they fight Gore in the Shadow Realm, and he takes Thor's axe, which he's gonna use to open the Bifrost. But then we find out that being Thor is actually draining Jane of her strength. It's making the cancer kill her faster. So she goes to the hospital. Thor goes to Eternity to fight Gore and rescue the kids, and he imbues the kids with the power of Thor to help him fight Gore and his army of CGI creatures. They do. Jane comes back in the end to help Thor fight Gore. They manage to break the Necrosword, which was infecting Gore, so he's dying now. Then they go to Eternity, and then Jane's dying of cancer, and Gore, even though he's accomplished his entire goal, get there and wish for all the gods to die, instead wishes that his daughter would come back to life. So she does, and Gore dies, and Jane dies also, and Thor adopts Gore's daughter. Terrible fucking idea to make your hero and your villain be named Thor and Gore. So Thor adopts Gore's daughter, and he takes her on adventures around the universe where they go around saving people, and that's how the movie ends. Okay, now that we've gotten that out of the way, we can talk about what this movie does specifically wrong in comparison with what its predecessor does right. Love and Thunder opens with this long narration about Thor's mental state, his history with love and opening his heart to people, and he's been hurt so many times that now he wants to just hide his heart away from people and all this stuff, where the narrator literally tells you a bunch of stuff about Thor's mental state, and then they never show that. He just this is what Thor's feeling like, and then that's it.
Come, gather round and listen to the legend of the Space Viking. He was sensitive, like a smile, and his loving nature did not discriminate. But sadly, in the battle for love, Thor lost. It seemed that everything and everyone he loved, he lost. And so he hid his heart behind a big fleshy bod, so it could never be broken again.
And throughout the movie, this is a running theme, is that every now and then, the narrator will just come in and will just narrate the character history and what they're feeling instead of the movie just showing you that. And unlike the rest of my criticisms of this movie, I don't really have a specific scene in Thor Ragnarok I can point to show how it was done better. But I will say, Thor Ragnarok in a big part is about the relationship between Thor and Loki. And I think they could have gone the same route and just had narration saying, Thor feels this way about Loki. Thor feels disappointment because Loki's betrayed him so many times, and he always dreamed of fighting side by side with Loki, but Loki just won't let that happen and all this stuff. But smartly, they just choose to show you that in the way that the two of them interact with each other. There's several scenes where it's just Thor reacting to what Loki's doing, and that's really good. Why? Because it just lets the audience see an organic reaction to Loki.
Say something.
What would you like me to say? I haven't seen this beloved champion he talks of, but I've heard he's astonishingly savage. I've placed a large wager against you tomorrow. Don't let me down.
Now we know how they're feeling towards each other, and it preserves a little bit of that internal character mystery. Characters in movies are not characters in books, right? You can't just write down what they're feeling and expect that to hit an audience cinematically as convincingly as it can on the page of a book. It's just not how it works. I think throughout Thor Ragnarok, there's a lot of examples of really good show don't tell moments when it comes to the relationship between Thor and Loki, and that's a lesson that seems like was unlearned between then and Love and Thunder in the relationship between Thor and Jane.
Let me tell you the legend of Thor and Jane. Thor taught Jane the way of the warrior, and Jane taught Thor the way of the people. And as time passed, their love grew deeper and deeper. But the more he pondered a life with Jane, the more he feared losing that life. And although Jane didn't want to admit it, she was scared of loss as well.
So a huge part of the beginning of Love and Thunder is this long sequence on this alien planet with the Guardians of the Galaxy where he's just fighting some unnamed Muppet creatures, and it's supposed to be this funny big CGI battle kind of a thing. I don't really know what the function of it is, but what really ends up happening is it just tries too hard to be funny. I think that can be said for this entire movie. Whereas Ragnarok, the jokes felt like they kind of flowed naturally, and in that way sort of made the flow of the whole movie a little bit easier to follow. Love and Thunder, the jokes are just painfully stilted. They take way too much space. They're not quite as good as the ones that were in Ragnarok. It feels like whereas the jokes in Ragnarok were easing the plot along, the jokes in Love and Thunder are kind of slowing the plot down.
Okay. Come on, Stormbreaker. Back to work.
Must hurry, okay?
People are dying. See you down there. Hurry up!
It's really apparent if you look at that first scene with the war against the Muppet creatures, because there's kind of a comparable CGI battle scene in Ragnarok. Ragnarok opens with Thor fighting against Surtur, who's this big CGI monster, and he's got this big CGI army. And that scene in Ragnarok is just done so much better for a couple of reasons. One, there are visual gags in both scenes, just quick, almost one-liners, but visually. And the difference between the ones in Ragnarok and Love and Thunder is the ones in Ragnarok are much shorter.
Then you have seen Ragnarok, the fall of Asgard, the great prophecy.
Hang on. I'll be back around shortly. Do I really feel like we were connecting there? Yeah. Okay, so Ragnarok. Tell me about that. Walk me through it.
They come at you much quicker, and they just kind of get in and get out. Whereas the ones in Love and Thunder are very heavy-handed. They take a long time to actually land. There's a lot of just dead space in between the lines. It's it really feels like it's dragging along. Second, the visual gags in Ragnarok are accompanied in the same scenes by things that actually contain useful plot information, right? In this scene with Surtur, there's this visual gag of, the chain that he's hanging on keeps turning around and he's facing away from him. And it takes a couple seconds for him to rotate back, but then in that scene, we're learning important stuff about the plot. We're learning about Surtur, the character who comes back at the end of Ragnarok. We're learning about Thor's mindset, about how he has nightmares about Asgard being destroyed. There are actual plot elements being conveyed in these scenes, and that makes the visual gags kind of blend in seamlessly with the story that it's trying to tell. In Love and Thunder, this first scene, there's really no plot being developed at all. It is purely filler, just something that the writers and the director thought would be just hilarious that really just isn't. It serves no purpose to the plot. You could cut this scene out of the movie and the movie would not change at all. Nothing important happens in this first scene, and when you start your movie like that, it's sort of we're never really sure when the plot is actually going to get started because the stuff you're showing us isn't important. Another point about these two scenes is the big CGI battles themselves, while, both visually cool to look at, in Ragnarok, the battle itself serves Thor's current goal in the plot. The movie opens with Thor being trapped in chains by Surtur in this like other realm from Asgard. And his goal at the time is escape. So the big CGI battle is him escaping from that situation. Thor at the beginning of Love and Thunder is just off on these like random adventures with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and fighting this Muppet army is not accomplishing anything towards the plot. He just fights them because that's what the movie has him do. He's just decided that he's going to fight. The movie literally opens with Star-Lord asking Thor to fight. There's no reason Thor is in this fight at all. It has nothing to do with his character.
Thor, we need your help to win this battle. Let's go.
So later in the movie, there's this scene where these actors in New Asgard are like putting on a play, and it's a callback to a scene in Ragnarok where these same actors also put on a play. But what's interesting about these two scenes is, in Ragnarok, this scene makes sense, and in Love and Thunder, it just doesn't. In Ragnarok, the function of this play scene is not just to give a recap of the events of previous movies to kind of catch people up who, weren't familiar with Thor and Thor the Dark World. It one, sets up the relationship between Thor and Loki, which is something that's greatly explored later in the movie, so that's actually important to have as knowledge beforehand. And also, at this point in Ragnarok, Odin has been exiled by Loki, who has disguised himself as Odin and is ruling over Asgard. And this play scene where Loki is, lounging around, eating grapes and all this stuff, is meant to show what Asgard has become in the time of Loki's rule. There is no similar plot function to this scene in Love and Thunder. The play scene just takes up space, and nothing that is said in that scene comes back to be paid off. Later in the movie, it is purely like a callback to the scene in Ragnarok, and it serves no other purpose, and it just takes up way too much space. It doesn't have a function to the plot. It's like the director thought, oh, well, we did this scene in Ragnarok and it was funny, and it worked, and it forwarded the plot, so we'll just do the same thing in Love and Thunder, and it'll be just as good. And it's like, no, it's a different movie with different requirements, different things that it needs to drive the plot forward, because it's a different set of circumstances. So a couple scenes later in Ragnarok, there is the scene where Thor is on Earth and he is summoned by Doctor Strange to kind of straighten things out between the two of them. And I think this scene best illustrates how Thor is written in Ragnarok as a character, and it is just completely different from how Thor is written in Love and Thunder. And it's like, changing how a character is written as they go through more events in their character arc isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't feel like a very organic change. In this scene, Thor is a serious character to whom funny things keep happening.
Earth has wizards now.
The preferred term is Master of the Mystic Arts. You can leave that now.
All right, wizard. Who are you? Why should I care?
And that provides sort of an interesting juxtaposition of character with world. And it also keeps us grounded in a character who is still going through a serious character arc. Right? If the character is serious but the world is funny, it's fine when the serious character, goes through serious character change, which he does in Ragnarok. In Love and Thunder, Thor is just kind of portrayed as this like bumbling goofball kind of a character, and it's like, that's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, but Love and Thunder tries to tell a serious story about Thor accepting love into his heart and learning to like cope with loss and all this stuff. And it's like, it's very hard to take that character arc seriously and expect a character to change that seriously when all you do is set him up as the butt of every joke and sort of the conduit of every joke. And to illustrate what I mean, watch this scene where he says goodbye to Star-Lord. Look at how long it takes him to shake hands.
Goodbye, old friend. Human handshake. To the Asgardian shake. Into the snake that you cannot trust.
Really dragging this out.
And finish the classic Asgardian high one.
It's like he's just this like slow-moving, kind of bloated comedic filler of a character instead of a character with like serious motivations and like actual potential for change. He feels like a cartoon character. Another thing that I think Love and Thunder does a lot worse than Ragnarok is it doesn't have a theme. They definitely tried to make a theme about, accepting love into your heart and, not hiding away from like the possibility of losing love and all this stuff. But they don't do enough to actually develop that theme for it to hit as hard as the theme does in Ragnarok. Ragnarok sets up a theme about the inevitability of loss and failure. And I think this is no better illustrated than in the scenes with Odin in Thor Ragnarok. This first one, where Odin dies. I think this one kind of sets up that narrative through line of loss, right? In this scene, Thor is pretty well convinced that he's just stopped Ragnarok because he's defeated Surtur, who is prophesied to cause Ragnarok. But Odin then just tells him like, hey, I know you just thought you stopped yourself from failing, but Ragnarok's gonna happen anyway.
It is upon us. Ragnarok.
No, I've stopped Ragnarok. I put an end to Surtur.
No. It's already begun. She's coming. My life was all that held her back, but my time has come. I cannot keep her away any longer.
Immediately we're hit with that theme. Okay, it doesn't matter how much you try to avoid it, this loss is inevitable. And just to hammer that point home, in that same scene, Thor loses not only his dad, but also his hammer, right? I think that it's a great use of sort of establishing a theme at the beginning of your movie. And I think that theme is carried through to this scene at the end with Odin, where Thor is worried that he's not strong enough to rule Asgard, that he's made too many mistakes, and Odin tells him, no, you are strong enough.
Even when you had two eyes, you'd see only half the picture.
It's too strong. Without my hammer, I can't.
Are you Thor, the god of hammers?
I'm not as strong as you.
No. You're stronger.
And I think this not only is a great payoff for the theme set up at the beginning of the movie, but an amazing payoff for the theme set up at the beginning of the character arc. And we'll talk a little bit more about the whole character arc thing in a little bit. I think that is what Love and Thunder is missing. It's missing that overarching through line. It's not really a movie about something. It's just kind of a collection of plot events and bad jokes just kind of crammed together into a movie. I think the closest thing this movie has to a theme scene, if that makes sense, is this scene near the end where Thor talks to Jane as she's back in the hospital trying to recover from her cancer, because it clearly explores the theme of like having to lose somebody and like lose a person you love.
I'm sorry, Thor.
Oh, there you are.
What's going on out there?
Some moron made a fridge without a door. Can you believe it?
Now you just gotta get this out
Go
of
for the...
my
Oh, no,
car.
That's got to stay in there. That's all the magic potions and elixirs doing their thing. So, just gonna pop out for a moment, pick up the kids, kill the bad guy, and then I'll come straight back.
You're going without me?
Yeah.
What happened to like doing everything together?
He's gonna use those kids to distract you.
You need me.
I do need you, Jane. I need you alive. It'd be great to have you on the battlefield, fighting Gore side by side, but that hammer is killing you. Every time you use it, it's draining all of your mortal strength, leaving your body unable to fight the cancer.
What happened to live like there's no tomorrow?
Well, that's before I knew you might not have one.
Why not have one more adventure?
Jane, if there's a chance to live, you have to take it.
Spoken like a true Thor who does not have cancer.
Look at me. I want to keep fighting. I'm the mighty Thor.
And you want me not to do that? What's the point of more time at this?
Because I love you. I've always loved you. And this is a chance for us. If you pick up that damn hammer again, then that chance is gone.
And it hits hard because the one or two jokes that are inserted into that scene are quick. They just hit you and then they're done, right? They don't linger for seconds at a time, and they don't get in the way of serious character dialogue where we get to like learn actual important stuff about what our characters are thinking and feeling. This is a scene that's actually done well, but the problem is it's the only one in the whole movie that actually takes this theme seriously, and that's not really enough to kind of push that through line throughout the entire movie the way Ragnarok did it. And not only is it missing a theme, it's missing that tie to the story of the character thus far, right? It doesn't feel like a fourth Thor movie because it doesn't really rely on what the character has been through in Thor 1 through 3. I found that another thing that Love and Thunder really got wrong was its villain. Gore, the God Butcher, like, very bland, forgettable villain. And I'm not saying that Hela from Thor Ragnarok was like some great villain or anything like that, but there were certain things about Hela that were done better than they did with Gore, because Hela actually threatens something very personal to Thor. She's threatening Asgard, and we find out she can't really be defeated without destroying Asgard. So beating her has a very personal tie to Thor. Gore steals the Asgardian kids at the beginning of the movie, and Thor is kind of working through the whole movie to get them back. But the problem is, his ultimate goal is not to take those kids. Hela's ultimate goal was to return to Asgard and use the Asgardian power to take over the rest of the universe, basically. Gorr's whole thing is he takes the kids to lure in Thor, but his ultimate goal is just like to go and make a wish to kill all the gods. And the problem with that is the goal of killing all the gods is not personal enough to Thor. Yes, Thor is a god, but the only time we are introduced to other gods in this movie is in this scene in Omnipotent City, where we learn that like the rest of the gods are assholes, right? They're not good people. We don't really care about saving them. So we have no reason to be attached to them. I think also Hela, as a daughter of Odin, as Thor's sibling, is kind of more personal in that way to Thor also, because she kind of represents Odin's secret legacy that Thor didn't really know about, and so that makes the conflict more personal as well. Gorr doesn't really have that personal tie to Thor. He's sort of just like a blank slate of a villain who's just sort of doing bad acts to do them. And to get at what I mean, it doesn't ever seem like Gorr's motivation is fully fleshed out. He's supposed to be like this loving father who lost his daughter and now is like been driven mad with rage over that, basically. But then in like a lot of scenes, he'll just be like scaring the Asgardian children for no reason. And it's like, aren't you a dad? Like, I don't understand why you're doing this if like you love your daughter so much. He's sort of a tonally mismatched character. They didn't really think him through very well, I don't think. One of the biggest problems that I think Love and Thunder has is that a lot of its scenes feel unrelated to the objective of the movie as a whole. I think the movie kind of forgoes character motivations and clear objectives in favor of like big spectacle. Like there's this scene where they're in Omnipotent City and they have to like fight their way out after their mission to recruit some of the gods to help fight with them goes wrong. And it feels like it goes on for a little bit too long because when they don't get reinforcements, it doesn't matter to their objective anyway. They just go. They're just like, ah, well, we'll leave. And they don't even try like escaping from this situation until minutes and minutes into this fight scene. That fight scene is like a long stretch of minutes where their current objective is not clear anymore. And I think what's weird is that Ragnarok proves that you can have that kind of like big spectacle and your movie is not going to feel directionless as long as you anchor it to a character objective. So in Ragnarok, we get to have that cool fight between Thor and the Hulk, which is like a big like fan servicey kind of moment, but we're told explicitly Thor needs to leave Sakaar and go back to Asgard to stop Hela. And the Grandmaster tells him, if you defeat my champion, you win your freedom.
Hey, Sparkles, here's the deal. If you want to get back to Asgard, any contender who defeats my champion, their freedom they shall win.
Fine, then point me in the direction of whoever's ass I have to kick.
So now, not only is it cool that Thor is fighting the Hulk, there's a thing in the back of our head. It's like, if he beats the Hulk, then the Grandmaster will theoretically like let him leave Sakaar and go back to Asgard. That really like will help him accomplish his goal. So that's something I think that Love and Thunder could have done better, is it could have tied its action scenes more clearly to character objectives. And I think on the whole, made the character objectives more understandable. It feels directionless because we don't really clearly understand what their motivations are. So with that said, that's kind of why I think Love and Thunder fails to live up to the same quality as Ragnarok. I think there are very specific things that show why one movie is better than the other. And I think all those very specific things, I think, speak to this movie's quality or lack thereof as an individual movie. But what stuck with me the most was the way that this movie plays fast and loose with Thor's character arc and how it sort of tells a story about Thor that really didn't need to be told, that didn't feel natural to the character arc of Thor. So now what I want to do is I want to talk about Thor's character arc from the beginning of the MCU, sort of how he progressed through it and where he ended up, and why Love and Thunder and Endgame in a lot of ways are sudden departures from the character arc that Thor was going through Infinity War. So going back and watching the first Thor, I think the thing it does really well is it sets up very clearly the direction that Thor is going to move in these movies. He starts as unworthy, and it's clear that the movies are going to be about him becoming worthy. It's kind of a cool theme. We'll talk more about this theme as we go on. So throughout both the Avengers and Thor 2, Thor really doesn't change much as a character. The events of those movies are very much unrelated to his character arc, generally speaking. It's not until Ultron that we actually see Thor start to change quite a bit and kind of get set up for where his character arc is going to go in the next couple movies. And in Age of Ultron, we see that Thor starts to perceive himself as a destroyer. I think they added in a couple of really interesting little details to kind of hammer that theme home. Like when they are in Hawkeye's house and Thor like steps on the Lego house that one of Hawkeye's kids made, and that like reminds him that he feels like he's a destroyer and that he'll like ruin everything he touches. I thought that was like kind of an interesting little detail.
Honey, I missed you.
Thor. I saw something in that dream. I need answers. I won't find him here.
So yeah, I guess overall, we start to see that Thor is afraid that he will ruin the lives of like all the people he loves, basically.
I can still save you. We are all dead. Can you not see it? You're a destroyer, Odinson. See where your power leads.
By the time we get to Ragnarok, it's clear that the writers are starting to move Thor into the final stages of his character arc, and the pace at which Thor starts to develop as a character really starts ramping up. I think a huge part of the character development for Thor is done in Ragnarok. Basically, in Ragnarok, we see that he is having these nightmares about failing and letting Asgard be destroyed. He's obviously worried that he's going to screw up, that he's going to fail, and that he won't be worthy to be the king of Asgard. I thought it kind of established that theme that we had been developing from the first movie about worthiness, right? He feels in his lowest moment like he's not worthy, he's not strong enough, but his father is there to remind him that he is strong enough. I think it's a good character moment. And those themes from Ragnarok about failure and loss are really pushed to their fullest when we come to Infinity War. I think Infinity War does the most for Thor's story out of any movie in the MCU. It starts kind of while he's riding high off the success of Ragnarok. At the end of Ragnarok, I feel like he was finally starting to take his place as king, which had been sort of foreshadowed since the first movie, and then to see him get absolutely demolished by Thanos in the very opening of the movie, it's just like, it's heartbreaking to watch, but then also I like what they do with his character in that they don't make him sort of despondent and depressed yet. That failure to Thanos sort of makes Thor start to feel like an almost kind of like a literary character. He thinks that like fate is going to lead him to defeat Thanos. He thinks he's kind of like owed a win after losing so much. He can't possibly lose anymore. So he gets kind of reckless. He does kind of crazy and suicidal, insane stuff the entire movie. Like, it seems like he feels like he's owed a win.
You know, I'm 1,500 years old. I've killed twice as many enemies as that, and every one of them would have rather killed me, but none succeeded. I'm only alive because fate wants me alive. Thanos is just the latest in a long line of bastards, and he'll be the latest to feel my vengeance. Fate wills it so.
Mm-hmm. And what if you're wrong?
Well, if I'm wrong, then what more could I lose?
So for the movie to make him fail at the end, it's just perfect, right? I think like from the very beginning, Thanos says that he's inevitable, but for Thor, it's failure that's inevitable. And I think at least where they took that at the beginning of Endgame was really cool. At the beginning of Avengers Endgame, we see a Thor who is completely broken after what he considers to be his biggest failure to Thanos. And before the 5-year time jump, he's angry with himself, desperate to make things right. And I think that's a very natural continuation of the story that we saw in Infinity War. And right after the 5-year time jump, when we kind of get reacquainted with him, we see that he has fallen into a real state of despair. But Endgame is sort of where we fall into the problems with what I think happened to Thor's story. That kind of despair that he's feeling at the beginning of the movie, it's so relatable, and it's weird because you'd think the character that's a literal god would be the least relatable character in this whole cast, but by making him fail and like screw up so many times, actually lose stuff, they make him kind of the most relatable character, I think. But as soon as they put that fat suit on him, they kind of ruin the entire character irreparably. Here's the thing, I think that people making these movies learned the wrong lessons from Thor Ragnarok. I think that they looked at that and they said, oh, a comedy. Well, it must be that making Thor funny is what's going to make him compelling. But I think what they didn't understand about Ragnarok was the comedy only enhanced the watchability for the audience. It was those serious character moments that made the movie good. You can't just do nothing but poke fun at the character and somehow expect his story to retain any of its weight. If you treat the character like nothing but the butt of a joke, then his whole storyline's gonna go out the window because we don't really care about what he's going through anymore. He's a joke. And I think it was a missed opportunity. They could have, instead of portraying him like being fat as a joke, they could have actually kind of like tried to depict how much he had let himself go off of the back of his failure, how truly despondent he was that he didn't even care about like taking care of himself anymore. It could have hit really hard, I think, but instead they chose to play it for a joke. So in this movie, the Avengers go back in time to get the Infinity Stones from different locations. I'm explaining this to you like you haven't seen Avengers Endgame, like you've seen it. So they go back and he goes back and he sees his mom and he talks with his mom, and that's supposed to be like this big pivotal turning point for his character. And that is like, that's so dumb.
Everyone fails at who they're supposed to be, Thor. The measure of a person, of a hero, is how well they succeed at being who they are.
First and foremost, his relationship with his mom has like never been addressed in the series at all. It's always been about the relationship between him and his dad. So why, at the pivotal point for his character, is he talking to his mom, a person who we, the audience, have had nothing, no connection, no relationship, no investment in that character or in that relationship between Thor and his mom? It should be Odin. And the reason it should have been Odin and not Frigga in this scene is because that would have tied the story at the end of the character arc to the formative events and experiences that Thor had gone through at the beginning of the character arc. My thing is, like, the way you start a story is very important because it tells the audience what story is going to be told, what the story is going to be about. So if from Thor all the way through Infinity War you tell me this is a story about a person who is going to try to become worthy of his loved ones, his power, his title, all these things he's going to try to become worthy of. And then at the last second you tell me, ooh, actually, this is really a story about the same guy just learning to just be who he is, to just be himself. And it's like, Thor was being himself at the beginning of Thor 1. He was arrogant, he was brash, and that was a problem. Him being himself is what got him into the trouble. I think just be yourself is not a good message if you're a bad person. I think that his journey to become a good person, to become worthy, was a good journey. But at the end, all of a sudden, he finds out, oh, the real test was just to be yourself. And then, in the next movie, we find out, oh, actually, the whole story was about Thor just didn't want to accept love into his heart and just locked all the people in his life away and just wouldn't love them. It's like, okay, well, the problem with that is it doesn't mesh up with anything I saw from Thor 1 through Infinity War. So that doesn't really work as an explanation for what I've seen for the last 4 or 5 movies. And it's like, you can't convince me that what I've seen of a character just didn't happen. You can't say, you didn't see any of that. That wasn't what the story was about. It was actually about this completely unrelated thing. It's like, no, I watched those movies. That's not what you were trying to tell me then. What they realized was, if they ended Thor's arc in Endgame and gave him a satisfying ending like all the other Avengers, then they wouldn't be able to make any more movies with him. And the way that I know that they didn't know where they wanted the character to go in Endgame, which is supposed to be the last entry in the story of these like original characters, is that they send him off on an adventure at the end with the Guardians of the Galaxy to find himself and figure out who he is. And the Guardians of the Galaxy are in like 5 minutes of Love and Thunder. They obviously did not know where they were going at the end of Endgame, and they just wanted to make sure they could string that character along for another movie to make a quick buck. And it's like, when your storytelling is driven by just like a pure financial incentive to make more movies, I lose all respect for you as a storyteller, I think. I think that also that kind of misses an opportunity to use Thor as a secondary character after he finishes his arc, right? What if we saw a Thor who was like fully self-actualized, finally ruling Asgard, and he was kind of like a side character in like a Loki movie or something? What if you use your fully developed characters as sort of a tool to help you develop your undeveloped characters? That way, you can still make your bajillion dollars off of Thor, but you do it in a way that actually tells a story that needs telling. And that's why this movie feels so different than Ragnarok. Ragnarok took itself seriously to continue a story that had already started, to actually push that story in the direction it was going, to take those themes from the first couple movies and actually bring them to the next level so they could be developed on even further in Infinity War. And Love and Thunder ultimately tells a story that did not need to be told because it doesn't give us a convincing place for Thor's story arc to go. At the end of this movie, it almost seems like they're setting us up for another movie, except now it's going to be about Thor adventuring with his little girl, like with Gor's daughter for some reason. This is not where his story arc was like set out to land at the beginning. All I can say is I hope that they don't make another Thor movie because it's obvious these people are creatively bankrupt when it comes to this character, and there's just nothing left to say. Anyways, that's all I've got for today, so thanks for watching. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe. I'm going to be making more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you around.